Amoris Laetitia, it was written in a way you could read anything you wanted to in it. And it was implemented in very different ways in very different dioceses. And then the Argentinians showed up and they had their implementation, which I'm pretty sure was Fernandez, by the way. His was the most radical interpretation possible. And what happened? The Vatican said that was the only interpretation. Don't be surprised if we get something like that from this.
Hey, today we're going to be talking about that document that's supposed to drop on Monday. The Vatican document on human dignity. It's about to publish. What's going to be inside of it? We're going to find out. We're going to talk to Dr. Anthony Stine from Return to Tradition about the human dignity document that is potentially going to cause waves. I mean, it's interesting because I saw several articles about it, and they're saying, hey, it's not going to be so bad. Don't worry about it. It's not going to be so bad. We'll find out what Dr. Anthony Stine feels about it.
By the way, my name is Joe McLean. I host a radio program called A Catholic Take, where we look at the world through a Catholic lens. I'd love for you to hang out with us. If you like it, give it a thumbs up and let us know what you think in the comments below.
Joining us now is Dr. Anthony Stine from the YouTube channel Return to Tradition. Dr. Stine, happy Easter. Good morning. Thanks for being on with us today.
Thanks for having me on again, and happy Easter to you and your audience.
Given the backlash of Fiducia Supplicans, everybody's kind of wondering what to expect here. And then I saw, I think it was The Pillar reported that in 2018, the USCCB actually drafted a document on the very same issues and then sent it to the Vatican for approval. And the Vatican's like, no, hold on, don't worry, we'll cover this. And now they're thinking that some of that document will be involved in this. So what can we expect? I think that's the biggest question in everybody's mind. What are you expecting out of all of this?
Well, Cardinal Fernandez told us that the document will cause less controversy than Fiducia Supplicans, which a lot of people will breathe a sigh of relief hearing that. I think that's a low bar. It's a very low bar to cause less controversy than something that destroyed ecumenical dialogue between the Eastern Orthodox, the Coptic Church, and the Catholic Church. It would be hard to come up with something as controversial as Fiducia Supplicans. I am reminded, for some reason, the feeling I get from this, I'm reminded of the declaration about St. Joseph that came out a couple of years ago. Do you remember that? There was a document, there was something that they released a thing about St. Joseph that a lot of people breathed a sigh of relief when it was issued, and it looked like at a surface reading very fine and normal. But then when you actually read it, there was a lot of sort of like globalist lingo sprinkled throughout it. And then anybody who objected to what was said and that was poo-pooed as being kind of an extremist. I mean, after all, the thing sounds Catholic, except for the poison pills throughout it. And that's more of what I kind of expect from this. The document that the Vatican had written 5 years ago had apparently gone through several drafts. There might be a few things from that time in it. In the aftermath of Fiducia Supplicans, the consistent thing you're seeing for most analysts on this is that you will expect to have the Vatican come down against gender ideology, transgenderism, all that stuff. We've seen Francis say good things about that recently. You'll probably have reiterations of some pro-life language, that kind of thing. But it's always the Catholic-sounding things that are used to kind of obfuscate some of the other statements in there. And so it'll be interesting to read the document when it's issued next Monday on the transferred feast of the Annunciation, which is the modus operandi of them. They love to issue their documents on these major feast days. And that is sort of a traditional thing that popes have done, but especially Marian feast days for Francis. Traditionis Custodes was issued on the feast of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, and a couple of very minor Marian feast days that were on older calendars were the days that both Fiducia Supplicans and 2 years prior to it, a clarification on Traditionis Custodes were issued.
But it seems like there might be a little bit of talking out of both sides of the mouth here when it comes to the transgender ideology. On one side, they want to open a door and a way, and they want to talk about, you can be a godfather, godmother, I suppose. But on the other hand, they want to be able to say, no, you can't receive the valid sacraments under these circumstances. They kind of want their cake and eat it too. Do you think the document will include a lot of gobbledygook-like language and ultimately come down to who knows what? Your interpretation, I guess, is all that's left.
I think that's a fair assessment. And I think the only thing I would tack on to that is Amoris Laetitia was written in a way you could read anything you wanted to in it. And it was implemented in very different ways in very different dioceses. And then the Argentinians showed up, and they had their document, their implementation, which I'm pretty sure was Fernandez, by the way. And his was the most radical interpretation possible. And what happened? The Vatican said that was the only interpretation. Don't be surprised if we get something like that from this. Now, interpretation of what? Who knows? Who knows? Because I don't know what human dignity even means in a Catholic sense, especially since this document's title translates to infinite dignity.
Yeah.
Joe, I have to ask you, does Catholic theology teach us that human beings possess infinite dignity? Or is that
That's a weird phraseology. That's been part of my problem. Even going back to JP2, is when we got Benedict XVI, I was like, finally, you can actually understand in the first reading of a document what Benedict is talking about. With JP2, you had to read it 10 times. We're still stuck in this world of sort of gobbledygook language going on for 200 pages, and you're just like, what did they just say? I find this infinite dignity phrase sort of in that camp.
For a lot of us, the benefit of the doubt, that train left the station a long time ago.
Yes,
this is why some of us are just hoping we get some just generic stuff that is meaningless, because there's also been a lot of just otherwise meaningless documents or things that are really only interesting if you are heavily invested in how Vatican City is governed. You know, those kinds of documents. Like, I don't find those all that interesting. But other documents that came and went without a lot of attention, though, were things like Cor Orans. Yeah, it's the one that governed, radically changed how religious orders were governed. And when it was issued, it didn't make a lot of headway. It didn't make a lot of headlines because it wasn't sensational. But the consequences of that document were catastrophic for religious orders.
Yeah. Yeah,
so
sure were.
One of these things, I mean, just because it looks innocent at first doesn't mean it's going to be.
How much of the dubia do you think will play a role in this document?
Oh, I don't even know. I would be surprised if there was anything written that was a response to the dubia. That initial dubia is never going to get responded to, I don't think. And the most recent dubia is not going to get responded to either, because people forget that, you had Cardinal Burke's first dubia back in 2016, and then you had a dubia submitted about blessings for gay couples and things, and the Vatican issued a response to that, but it was like sort of a mental gymnastics things for responses for things that should have only been yes or no questions. And so Cardinal Burke and the other new dubia cardinals issued another dubia written in much plainer language that literally said at the end of each question, yes or no will suffice. And that one has never been responded to. And I don't think you're going to get a response either for any of those.
That pushback on Fiducia Supplicans, and it was a worldwide pushback. I think we can't overstate that enough. It wasn't just African bishops; it was bishops and clergy from all over the world push back on that. You would think that the Vatican wouldn't want to go through that again. Paul VI never wanted to write another encyclical as a result to Humani Vitae's pushback. Yet this pontificate doesn't seem at all fazed by that pushback. Do you see that as well?
Francis strikes me as much more of a fighter, right? I mean, you see it in the rhetoric he uses, how he's willing to push back as hard as he gives, even though he sometimes will wrap it in a little softer language than his critics will give to him. I don't know about Paul VI, though. I think Paul VI almost looks like he gave up after a while.
Yeah.
He had some buyer's remorse for the changes in the church that he was responsible for ushering in. Tried to dial it back some, but clearly most of the bishops started ignoring him. And I don't know about that with Francis. He strikes me as something, he has a very different, I think, approach to these things.
What do you think the chances are the next pontificate that will be someone like a Francis versus maybe someone who's like liberal theologically, but at the same time doesn't have that fighter sort of backbone that Francis seems to have and sticking to his guns and his agenda?
What I have read and reported on before, that the St. Gallen group, if you want to call them that, or their successors have been meeting, and what they've decided is they want to try to push for a pope who is on the same page as the liberal wing like Francis is, but is easier to control. Also probably someone a little more charismatic. Like the Francis that undermines his own works whenever he starts talking about rigidity and clericalism and not wearing grandma's lace and things like that. That undermines his own work when he does that. The St. Gallen group are going to be trying for a more moderate tone, but still radical kind of pontificate. And on the flip side of that is Demos II, right? Which I suspect is Cardinal Mueller. When I read it, that document screamed Cardinal Mueller to me when I read it. They want also a moderate, but as someone who's actually a moderate, not a traditionalist, not a hardline conservative. They want a moderate who will listen to a council of cardinals. Do I think we're going to get a moderate? I think there's a chance we will. but the numbers on the College of Cardinals, Pope Francis has replaced something like 75% of them at this point. I don't like the odds, even though there probably aren't that many radicals there. He announced yesterday or the day before that he's going on a tour in the fall before the next phase of the Synod of Southeast Asia. I'm likening this to him going on a campaign tour. Part of it is his recent rhetoric about Benedict being his first choice in the 2005 conclave, which I'm very skeptical of. It conflicts with every single thing we've ever heard from the Cardinal Daniils and their types. Yeah. Everything we've heard was Cardinal Martini was supposed to be Pope Francis, but he got leukemia and he passed away. But before he did, he recruited somebody to replace him, and that was Jorge Mario Bergoglio, Pope Francis. And they made a very hard push in 2005, because the only time in probably modern history that the likely candidate to succeed a pope that everybody thought was good, the front runner, was the one who was the pope afterwards, and that was 2005 with Benedict. Most people thought that Ratzinger was going to become pope, but it almost didn't happen because of this heavy push by the St. Gallen Mafia. And it's why it's so fascinating that Francis is saying that, Benedict was his personal choice and that he was used. It conflicts with everything we've heard about this, to the point where a lot of people honestly just don't believe it. I mean, maybe that's how he chooses to remember it, but that's a lot of people simply do not believe it. He could have voted for Benedict in the final ballot just to get the thing over with. I don't remember how many days that conclave was.
It wasn't that long, really. Yeah, it was a pretty short one.
Right. And this comes out hot on the heels of Francis announcing that he's not going to change any rules for the coming conclave. I put an asterisk next to that. He qualified it by saying it's of at best secondary importance. I put an asterisk next to that because there's a lot of people are just openly saying they think Francis is going to pass away soon. I tend to, find that speculation kind of ghoulish, but I also don't think that's even true. I think he's going to be around for a while yet. If he wasn't going to be around for a while, he wouldn't be planning his trip to Southeast Asia. But as I was saying, this is all part of a kind of a campaign tour. There are a lot of articles being published by National Catholic Reporter, American Magazine, and other kinds of outlets like them, hinting that they believe that Francis should resign, that he should retire early and become a Pope Emeritus. And this is clearly him campaigning against that idea, but also trying to make himself a little more moderate, while also campaigning for, essentially, I think, for the conclave that will elect a successor. And he's doing that by going to the global south, Vietnam, Indonesia, a few other places like that, but doing that in the fall. And if I was Cardinal Tagle, I would be joining him on as much of that tour as I possibly could, because I don't know if you're aware of this, but Cardinal Tagle was considered the front runner to be Francis II. And then he had a few missteps. His popability kind of tumbled a little bit, but apparently recently he's being seen again as a front runner. It blows my mind. Every time I picture Cardinal Tagle, you've seen the video footage where he's at World Youth Day literally rapping with kids. Yeah. Right? Yeah. To give you, there's a certain dignity that should come with the papal office, and I don't know if he's capable of maintaining that dignity.
It's cringy. Seeing the video footage of Tagle dancing and doing all these shenanigans, just trying to impress the young people. I don't know that they're all that impressed. They probably laugh, but it's not that impressive. And it's cringy to watch. It's
the higher up the ecclesiastical ladder person doing it sits, the worse it is, the cringier it is. I'm uncomfortable when I see a priest doing stuff like that.
Right.
And when I see, priests, getting up on stage with a guitar in their hand, starting to, play rock music, that makes me uncomfortable. It really does.
Yeah,
for sure. I don't care what they listen to in their own time, whatever. But, I don't want to see priests talking publicly about, their video game habits and things like that. That's just, there's a line.
So true. Yes.
And the higher up the ladder you go, the worse it is. And so now you have a cardinal archbishop of the church rapping publicly. That's just with kids. I mean, yeah.
There's another article I want to bring up from 1 Peter 5, 1peter5.com, and Bishop Shapo resists Francis ahead of new document. It's resistance, but it's pretty light fare overall. He doesn't take the kind of strong position that I or you might even take in regards to pushing back or resisting against Francis. He's not the kind of guy who rocks that boat all that often. He's been very pro-life. He said a lot of great things during his active ministry days, but now in retirement, you almost never hear from him. What do you make of Bishop Shapo?
He'd been silent for a long time. Maybe he would go give a public mass somewhere and say some things, but he hasn't been a prolific writer. I know, because whenever I present the writings of any bishop who challenges the status quo in Rome, right? That's one of the things that I do regularly. And it was surprising to see something from him. I think you're correct in saying that he would be a canary in the coal mine. I think a lot of the moderate bishops are done. They're just done with this stuff. And I think Fiducia Supplicans finally was the straw that broke the camel's back. Amoris Laetitia was that for a lot of laymen, holy, sacrament of marriage and things being undermined with that document. But Fiducia Supplicans was just too much. It does almost make you wonder, doesn't it? If I know we know that Demos II is a cardinal. That's what we know. And if Shapo was a cardinal, I would almost think he would have written the thing, because it's not that flamboyant of a document. In the same way that what the bishop here in this article was saying was fairly commonsensical, moderate kinds of critiques of things going on. If you're looking for a strident traditionalist bishop, that's not who this bishop is at all. His critiques don't have that air about them. They don't come close to anything like Archbishop Vigano says. They don't come close to, in a very peaceful way, the way Bishop Strickland talks about things when he chooses to. But nonetheless, the things he has to say are very on point and was surprising to see.
Did you like that video? It's okay. You can admit it. It's perfectly fine. Hey, we cover the big stories of our day, from inside the church to outside the church to all points in between, and we do it from a Catholic perspective. It's called A Catholic Take. It's a radio program Monday through Friday. We live stream it right here on this channel, by the way, so make sure to subscribe, like, and share. We would be very grateful to you. And don't forget, you're going to want to watch this video right here because you don't want to miss anything.